making a bad decision can have consequences for decades. So can refusing to make a decision at all. The glory and the horror of Donald Trump is that at his core, he's got a really good point. The strategic order the Americans created to fight the Cold War no longer serves American strategic needs. It hasn't since the wall fell. But it was never supposed to serve American economic needs.
Hello from Colorado's snowmass wilderness. I'm Peter Zion with a COVID update. I'm afraid it's not good news today. Of the top 11 states in terms of current death rates per capita, only one, California, has enacted anything that resembles a sort of activity that is actually going to reduce caseloads. Anywhere else, the caseloads are increasing pretty dramatically and have been now for 4 months.
What the Russians have always tried to do is to expand to that outer shell and then plug the access points, these gaps. Now the Mongols like these two in particular, the Persians the next two, the Turks invaded multiple times through the next two, the Germans of course have never met a square foot of Poland they didn't enjoy marching across. Sweden invaded Russia through the Balts twice, and here everyone with a boat has invaded Russia here. Canada, yes, Canada has invaded Russia through the White Sea.
Invaded every generation or two. This means that in the world before what we consider normal, there were really only about a dozen significant powers, and they would branch out beyond these core zones as empires in order to conquer large tracts of territory and use those resources to feed their populations, to trade, to have captive markets, and ultimately to outcompete everyone else who's among those 12. This led to wars, a lot of them, constantly. Bigger and badder wars as the industrial period built. Eventually got things like tanks and artillery and ultimately hydrogen bombs. That led to World War II. That brought the entire system crashing down. And of those 12 geographies in the world, only one of them wasn't level. And that was the United States. It's as if the entire developed world forgot how to have kids around 1975. And I think we've all traveled enough to know they got the basics down. This combination, a bigger global boomer cadre but no global Y cadre, spells disaster. Consumer activity and tax income will shrink every single year. Retiree costs will increase every single year. It's a deflationary spiral with no escape, and it will happen everywhere but the United States. And that's the good news. Germany relies on nuclear power for roughly 1/3 of its electricity needs. And at this point, the closure of the entire nuclear sector opens up a four-way power game for the future of the German economy and German loyalties. The German plan is to replace the entirety of the nuclear industry with renewable power. Unfortunately for the Germans, this is not cost possible. Nuclear power is less than 1/3 the cost of wind power and less than 1/20th the cost of solar power. Replacing 1/3 of their total power generation within a decade is simply not feasible, much less possible. Which brings us to the other three options. The first is France. France's entire post-World War II strategy has been about lashing itself to Germany so that Germany can never again threaten it. In the post-Cold War era, the strategy has been refined somewhat in order to make France as essential to German plans as possible. Now, unlike Germany, France's population is remarkably pro-nuclear. And so the French are going to be trying to build as many nuclear power reactors as possible so that they can export electricity to Germany to make up as much of the difference as possible.
They have the best land in the continent. In fact, it's the second best land overall in the world. It's got navigable rivers, overlain, lightly populated but very fertile provinces. This is the makings of a world power, and as recently as 1920, Argentina was a world power. It was the world's 4th richest country. As the rules of the game change internationally, they are extraordinarily well positioned to make the most of it. It will require some political changes in Buenos Aires. They're going to have a different mindset in approaching the world around them. But there is not another country in the world outside of Argentina that has more going for it right now, if they choose to take advantage of it. Demographically, from a growth point of view, they're even in a better position than Brazil, one of the best in the world. They just have to change some of their more interesting policies.
term, forced to sit 6 feet apart, forced to sit with masks. But you can't really do that with the college kids. Not only are they more mobile, they have their own cars, they have their own lives. You're not going to be able to prevent a 20-year-old from going to a frat party, especially if the administration says that they can't go.